Everybody to the Eliminating Blind Spots webinar, How Top Sales Leaders Succeed. We are very excited today to welcome Mark Sellers back, sales coach and author, today most relevantly of the book Blind Spots. We have did a dry run last week, and I learned a lot just going through the dry run. So I'm very excited to dive in today and get the full presentation, interact a little bit with Mark, and see how you guys are responding to some of the prompts in here. As usual, we will make this an interactive session, so please drop your comments, questions, observations in the chat. We understand that these are a little bit more engaging when we're interacting back and forth with you all. So don't be shy about that. We'll have a couple polls as well. And I am Laura Hall. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Revigy. And Mark, I will let you give a deeper dive into your intro, but thank you for coming back to do another webinar with us.
It is absolutely my pleasure, Laura. And there's a picture of the two of us. So yes, this is going to be another ham and egg, if you will. So Laura, feel free to jump in anytime. I think we had a good conversation about the customer buying journey last time. So I'm anticipating a good conversation here as well. A completely different topic though, as you said, blind spots. 30 seconds or less, when I published my book and my dad read it, he said, this is a really terrific work, Mark. Good job. You really helped me understand your mother's blind spots a lot better now. I'm like, yeah, Dad, we got some work to do on you. We all have some work to do on all of us. And that's what blind spots really is about. I do want to say that this webinar is specifically for the senior sales leader. So blind spots is not just for the senior sales leader. It's for any sales leader, frontline manager, all the way up to the president, the CEO, the owner of the business. But I really want to speak to, Laura and I really want to speak today to the senior sales leader. So hopefully that comes through loud and clear as we go through this. I'll condense this eye chart to 15 seconds or less. I've been doing what I do, sales training, coaching, consulting for about 25 years. And it's just a terrific career. I mean, I can't just say how much I enjoy the people that I work with, the companies, large and small. I've worked with some multi-billion-dollar organizations. Everybody just seems motivated to improve. And I was excited to bring blind spots to that community, if you will. And hopefully those of you who know me through Funnel Principle, you'll be enjoying blind spots as well. Although sometimes it's not that enjoyable when you start asking yourself the tough questions. So my business basically is a function of implementing sales process through this system I have called the Funnel Principle. It's an opportunity management and funnel management system. So two components there. And then blind spots, which like Funnel Principle, I really didn't write thinking of the market, to be honest with you. I wrote it because the clients I had were experiencing blind spots as I began to know them. And I began talking to them about blind spots, and they found it very intriguing as they learned my story of blind spots. So this is it's a personal book. So there's a lot of me, a bit of a public witness, and some phenomenal things that I went through in my life that helped me become a better version of myself, personally and professionally. It's that powerful. It really is. So I encourage you, if this is a starting point for you, to really ask yourself some tough questions about the kind of leader you are, then I will feel great if even one of you does that as a result of today's webinar. So what are you going to learn today? You're going to hopefully learn a number of things. Number one, what are blind spots? Okay, we'll define what blind spots are, why you have them, why they're a problem, why blind spots kill your coaching efforts. We're also going to get into 3 high-value coaching questions. They're not mine, by the way. They're from another coach's book, a Canadian coach, and I just think it's a terrific book that he's written, and I love these questions. I'm going to share them with you. I use them in my practice all the time. Got to talk about data and in the role that data actually plays in maybe producing some blind spots. We know data is good. It is really good. And it can lead to some blind spots. So we need to talk about that as well. how to raise your awareness level. I think there's a huge running theme through this entire blind spots stuff. It is about emotional intelligence, which is a topic that many of you probably online have heard of. Maybe you've taken emotional intelligence tests, et cetera, assessments. So there's a big part of this that is emotional intelligence related. And then finally, how do you work well with your colleagues? You have your direct reports, and that's key, right, to helping you become more effective as a leader. But the senior leader uniquely has to interact with all these other functional leaders who obviously don't report to you. That's a full-time job in and of itself, So we're going to give you some ideas for how to be aware of your blind spots when you are working with your functional leaders. Okay. So far, so good, Laura?
Doing well. I'm looking forward to diving into it.
Okay. All right, let's do it. So I'd like to frame this up. Every time I do a webinar, and I'm looking down, you'll see me looking down at my notes from time to time. I like to ask myself, what's the problem that I'm trying to solve or address with my audience today? And that's how I build every webinar. And, sometimes maybe I hit a home run, and sometimes I hit a single or double. So hopefully today it's a home run. But when I think about the problem, many problems or challenges of the senior sales leader, the one problem I want to talk to you about today is really the issue not of meetings. There's nothing inherently wrong or problematic about meetings, but when you think about what you're doing all day is you're meeting with people all day. You're meeting with your direct reports. You're meeting with your boss, maybe, who might be the EVP or the CEO or the president or the owner. You're meeting with other functional leaders. You're meeting with customers. Maybe you're meeting with some suppliers or vendors, and you just go from one meeting to the next. And I know this is difficult to bring a bunch of good substance and style, if you will, to every one of those interactions. It's very difficult. You've got agendas to consider for these meetings, right? You got to get your head on. It's like, why are we meeting, and what's the purpose of this meeting? What's the agenda? There's the political dynamics that you always have to deal with. The meetings can run together, like one big long meeting all day. It's tempting to lose interest in a topic at these meetings, and maybe your best doesn't come through. It's tempted it's easy to be impatient and want to move on. The pace of the conversation is not what you would like it to be. It's tempting to start thinking of the next meeting when you're in the meeting, and you might even lose your cool or some composure. So, and the punchline here, this is when the blind spots may take over, may rear their ugly heads. So this is what I want to do for you today, is just try to help you in every one of these interactions, which is your life as the senior leader, moving from interaction to interaction to substantively and stylishly bring your best, be the best version of yourself, to be, frankly, the best, most effective leader that you can be. Okay. So with that said, we have a poll. Laura, I'll let you take this.
Looks like it just popped up there. So we're interested to find out of this audience, which of the below most closely represent the greatest challenge to your success as a sales leader. Understand a lot of these go hand in hand, so just choose the best answer. But process, technology, people, supply chain or vendor problems, or customer problems. So if you'll go ahead and choose the one that might best fit something that you're struggling with. Hopefully a lot of the supply chain problems are out of the way, but seems like something new pops up every day.
Yeah, I talked to a client a couple of weeks ago, and he said, just when I think it's getting better, it's something bad happens again. So
right.
They're, a lot of companies probably still experiencing some supply chain issues.
Yeah, glad not to be building a house right now.
And as I drive around, I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I drive around, I see all the building, and I think exactly the same thing. I built a house in 2005, and I know the process and I know the expense of that house, which I've since sold. Just getting lumber, is, and let alone the trades, a real challenge.
Yeah, no shortage. All right. So not a surprise here. People problems are the winner. 37% of you said people problems are the biggest challenge. Close second, we had a tie, 26% each, process and technology. And those supply chain and customer problems are lower, thankfully, 5% each.
So again, this is just to not make a huge point here, but I think that a lot of our problems can really be the people problems. You know, it may feel like a technology problem. Maybe it's really a people problem. It could feel like a supply chain problem. Maybe it's really a people problem, right? So if you have that kind of outlook, then maybe you're going to attack the problem in a more effective way. So let's just keep that in mind as we go through this. Okay, so let's get into defining, if you will, what blind spots are. So what I thought I would do is use an image first to define what blind spots are. And this is an image that a lot of people, I think, on the line can relate to. I won't ask you to reveal how, because maybe that's getting a little closer to home. But the fact is, you know, if you have kids or if you have even grandkids and you've been to a soccer match or you've been to a hockey game, you've been to a basketball game, you see the sort of the ugliness of the parent on the sideline is screaming at somebody, maybe the ref, maybe a coach, maybe even the players, right? We've probably all have seen that. And what's interesting about this is I say that if you were to approach those people in the moment and say something like, do you realize how foolish you look? I think that they would look at you and say, what are you talking about? You're out of your mind. Did you see that call, right? Did you see that play? They just won't see it, right? They won't see what's so obviously seen by everybody else, you know? And that's kind of how it is with blind spots. We go through our lives being who we are, what comes so natural to us in our personal lives and in our business lives. And then we do something where that blind spot behavior is just not flattering at a minimum. And maybe at worst, it's really nasty. It's maybe destructive, but we don't see it. We absolutely don't see it. And so your first challenge in dealing with blind spots is getting to see them, becoming, again, emotional intelligence, becoming aware that you could actually be behaving in certain ways that are just not flattering. So here's the formal definition. And as you can see, you know, it's this behavior that prevents you from making an emotional connection with somebody. Now, I've got a couple of blind spots titled books on my desk that I've read and I refer to from time to time. They don't look at it that way, and that's fine. So this is my definition of what a blind spot is. It's that lack of emotional connection. A couple of examples. You know, I had a manager who eventually was fired because he just was so toxic as a personality. He did not waste any time letting the salespeople and his managers, he was a director of sales, letting his managers and his salespeople know that he just didn't respect them. And I mean that. He just did not really care if that came through. He lasted a couple of years and it was brutal. So that was something that he repeatedly did. He gave that vibe. He gave that aura. Blind spots can also be something that you don't do, that you should do. So another example is I coach managers when they are coaching their salespeople. So we all dial in and there's maybe it's a pipeline review kind of a call, maybe it's a deal review kind of a call. And so the manager's leading it and then I'm watching the manager and, you know, they may ask me to jump in from time to time, but my role there is to coach that manager. And there was one call, a pipeline call, where the manager didn't say something in response to the salesperson getting very excited about an appointment that he just made. He was going to jump through the phone, I thought, with excitement. And I was waiting for the salesperson to say something like, "Hey, that's great. Hey, fantastic." Or "What a lesson in persistence." And instead he said, "Is that on your funnel?" And it's just these little things that, you know, you think, is it really a big deal, Mark? You know, one time, it's not a big deal. Come on. But these behaviors are not one-time behaviors. They are part of our DNA. They're the things we miss. They're the things that we do repeatedly. And over time, that's why blind spots are a problem. It's like, you know, water dripping on a rock, you know, it looks like it's not really having an effect, but fast forward a few centuries and now you've got a canyon or something, right? So that's why we have to be aware of these blind spots. We're literally leaving money on the table in terms of performance when you don't recognize that you do these things, and when they are, up to a point where they're destructive enough. They can be annoying, and that can be passed over maybe over time by whoever's being annoyed, but that annoyance maybe gets escalated where it really becomes destructive. We've all heard the statistic about when salespeople leave their companies, they don't really leave their companies to go work for another company. They leave their bosses. And so this is kind of what we're talking about. They leave their bosses because they don't want to work for this kind of a person anymore. They can't put up with it. Okay.
Well, that's true in any department too. With the talent shortage right now, this is even more important than ever. I think, I've been in marketing most of my career, and I left a job once because I had a head of marketing that, this wasn't the entire reason, but she didn't realize she was doing it. That anytime somebody came up with a new idea in a brainstorming session or a meeting, she would immediately tell you why it wouldn't work. What's the point of a brainstorm if you're not going to do that as a group? So it can happen anywhere. And I mean, it can happen from the top down, bottom up even.
And what's interesting about that, Laura, is there might have been a really good reason for her to not want to talk about, maybe some brainstorming ideas for new products or new markets or new something. Maybe there was a good reason, but she didn't communicate that good reason to you. All you saw was, it's a brainstorm session and you're shutting me down every time. So we've got to make sure that even when it's maybe obvious to us, again, the blind spots, we don't see them. We got to make sure that we're real clear so that there's no miscommunication. I know this is saying a lot, but this is our job. It's a tough job as a senior sales leader. So here are some other examples, if you will, they're generic examples, but it'd be interesting, Laura, if people could send in the chat box and say, yeah, I have a boss, or I know somebody to keep the anonymity. This happens all the time in my company, right? People talking over people, which is pretty common these days with video conferencing, right? There's always this delay factor, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who cut people off and they don't realize they're cutting people off. And that really gets annoying after a while. Or not paying attention, when you're supposed to be paying attention, when somebody is counting on you to give you him or her undivided attention. Or sometimes it's not acknowledging, like this manager who I said, he should have said, wow, that's great. I know you've been chasing those guys down for months. Great job. Not acknowledging, something, not recognizing. That's a blind spot, a very common one. Two of my favorites are the last two, not saying I'm sorry and not admitting a mistake. These are tough. Maybe somebody, frankly, the picture comes to mind right now. I can tell you I've got two images in my mind of people who I never have in my life. I've never heard them say, I'm sorry. And I mean that. And it's interesting. These are tough people. They've got, like all of us, they've got some issues, but hopefully we don't have anybody on the call like that. But if you are, then maybe you can take that on as a project to get better at saying you're sorry and acknowledging that maybe that's been a blind spot for you for some time. On a funny note,
we did have someone in the chat agreeing with the individual not listening, and a clear sign of them even not being open to new ideas. So okay. I think as much as we're multitasking today and we think we're doing a good job because we're trying to cram, 24 hours of work into a 12-hour day, or an 8-hour day should be, you're not, you're doing your people a disservice, even though you're just really trying to maintain that balance.
Yep. So without a little humor, life would be really a challenge. So Michael Scott, probably in the public domain, the person who has committed the most gaffes related to blind spots, I think, that I've ever seen or watched. Obviously, it's a phenomenal series and so many funny moments. But if you want to see some good examples of blind spots, you say, how many times you just shake your head when you're watching, you say, I can't believe he did that, or I can't believe they allowed that actually to be part of this particular episode. But there is nothing funny in the end about blind spots. It's serious, and we got to figure out how to deal with them, because over time they can cause people to leave and it's a surprise. You have no, just like your blind spots are a surprise. You're like, what? You're putting in your resignation. Yeah, I'm going to work for somebody else. Seems like it comes out of nowhere. We've got to be more aware. And again, back to emotional intelligence. That's what this is really all about. So I think we have another poll. We're going to ask David to launch now. Thank you, David.
Yeah, this one we'll explore this a little more in the next slide, but a lot of times we rely more heavily on one thing or the other too. Data, everything's supposed to be data driven. We have to have numbers behind everything, and that's great. But if you rely solely on that, you're missing some of these common sense, emotional intelligence, qualitative pieces that might be obvious to any other people around you. Same if you rely too heavily on your gut. I mean, I may feel very strongly that we should be going in this direction, but if all the data is telling me to go in the other and I'm not paying attention to that balance, maybe that's a blind spot too. And if you're in a great place, then you're leaning heavily on both. You have that combination down. But I think most of us have a natural inclination to go one way or the other and have had to learn over time or are still learning, reminding ourselves to, okay, make sure you're looking behind this corner and behind that corner, and surrounding yourselves with the type of people that have those types of skills is also important.
Yeah. So how's this poll looking, Laura?
About to pop up here. Looks like most people are quite advanced, 88% in a combination. So that's great. Once you get to this point in your career, you would hope to have developed that skill. Yes. But it's hard to break old habits. So we have a couple, an even split between data and gut too, at 6% each there. And it's something, I have to talk to myself about every day.
We tend to lean on our strengths, right? I mean, and that's I said this in a conversation or a webinar, I think in the past. The worst thing you can do, as a manager to become a more effective manager, senior leader, et cetera, is to double down on your strengths. I think the best thing we can do is to really go after the areas that are weak to us. And that takes a big person to do that. I had a client to me that in effect said that. It just occurred to me. She said this the other day when we had a session, we were talking about blind spots. She said, I said, this conversation we were having kind of sounded like a therapy session. And she laughed and she said, Mark, at my level, and she runs a over $100 million business. At my level, I don't need more product knowledge. I don't need more technical knowledge. I don't need a lot more hard skills, working spreadsheets, knowing numbers. She said, this is exactly what I need to be working on. And emphasis, need to be working on. A lot of these things do not come easy. So my hat's off to her. So a mini summary here, right? Blind spots, right? It's when you don't make emotional connections with your people, anybody you're interacting with, they're repeated behaviors. So don't think that it's just a one-time thing and what's the big deal. And absolutely over time, they can cause performance to suffer. So let's transition. Where in the world do these blind spots come from? Why do we have these things? Well, as you might see this slide and infer that, maybe it has something to do with how we are wired. Yes, this is reason number one, why we do these blind spots kinds of behaviors. Now think about this, wired, how you're wired. You can't rewire yourself. So so therefore, is this a lost cause? No. What it means is you can still change behavior. You can still become a more effective senior sales leader, but it's likely going to cause a lot of heartburn because you're going to have to do a lot of shadow boxing. You're going to have to be honest, brutally with yourself. It won't come natural, these things that you are choosing to work on. So beware if you take the journey. I hope you all do. Think about personality. This is another way of thinking of this. So if you have ever had any personality assessments, Myers-Briggs, Strengths Finders, I'm a big fan of the Enneagram. This is what we're talking about. You have a DNA of how you are made up. It's like breathing. If you're competitive, for example, you don't think about being competitive. Laura, you and I were talking in the prep last week. Laura, you played at a very high competitive level softball, correct?
That's right.
I mean, like all-star level softball, Olympic development programs and stuff like that. You don't have to think about being competitive. You don't wake up and say, gee, I need to turn my competitive, switch on today. And I'm wired kind of the same way. And we both kind of joke that we both, I associate myself as an Enneagram 3. for those of you who are Enneagram fans. Chat box, let me know. We'd love to hear if anybody is a fan of the Enneagram. Laura, you tested recently as an Enneagram 3 as well. So we're very competitive kind of people. Or if you know somebody who's, they're just really gentle, kind spirits, right? These are things that they don't work on. It's just who they are. And so therefore, their natural tendencies in behaving this way, however that is, in a way, we can't even give them credit for that way. You can't give me credit for being competitive. I was born that way. I chose to leverage that to be a competitive golfer. Laura, competitive softball. But the things that don't come natural to us, this is where it's really going to be a lot of fun. So you could say that culture could have an effect on blind spots, maybe culturally actually contributing to a blind spot kind of thing. I believe that. You think about WeWork, a strange company. If you've seen any of the profiles, I think Netflix may have had one. It was pretty interesting. A strange company, a strange and now wealthy man in Adam Neumann, in a strange concept to some degree, but it was a bit like a cult, I think. My words, and maybe some other people's words as well. The Challenger tragedy of 1986, David Epstein, in his wonderful book, Range, terrific book, talks about, he doesn't use the word blind spot, but he talks about the culture of NASA being so data-driven that, in my words now, they literally had blind spots. They could not see the information that was presented to them that suggested there could be risk that morning, that fateful morning. Because there wasn't data, they said it's launch time. And the rest, unfortunately, is history. Wells Fargo, a culture of bad stuff, right? Enron. So yeah, I think when you think about your culture, and again, what if you can share with us through the chat box, if you've ever experienced a culture where you'd say, it feels like now, as we've defined blind spots, that maybe the culture actually contributed to people having blind spots in the way people were treated, the way business was transacted. So that's reason.
We actually have a couple in the chat here to that very point. And Mark, before this in our dry run, we were betting most people on this call would be a 3 or an 8. And we've had people on here saying they were 8s, saying they were 3s. So I think we were right. Too bad we didn't put money on that, although we both would have won. And I really like this perspective too about the Enneagram and always trying to categorize customers and coworkers. And the quote from this was, success in sales involves understanding behavior and motivation. So understanding yourself, and then also understanding how to interact with those around you and make assumptions. And the follow-up was, this person is a 9, but evolving towards a 3. So these things aren't static either. You can work to develop your blind spots, to develop your weak points, or things, traits that you wish you had more or less of.
Yeah, great input. Thank you all for sharing that. It is truly about your motivations. We like to judge people based upon their intentions. When we see somebody do something, we judge their intentions. In other words, we say, we know why she did that, or we know why he's behaving that way, but we don't want to be judged by our intentions. We want to be judged by our behavior, and we don't want our questions intentioned. And so that comment by somebody is so profound. And if we just take that and say, we see behavior, senior sales leader, you see your director of sales, your manager, sales manager, whatever, doing something that frankly, they shouldn't be doing, or is just not real effective, stop and pause before you jump to conclusions about what the intentions were, right? You can judge that behavior, absolutely, but be careful about judging the intentions. So number one reason why we have these blind spots is because of how we are wired. Number 2 reason, something I call the vice in the virtue, So basically, it's a paradox. As you can see, paradoxical statements on the screen. I won't repeat these, but this is a big paradox. You wrap your arms around this, and you have a long way to, you are making a big step towards that long journey you have of becoming the better leader that is inside of you. So the idea here is that some things, for example, we talked about Laura and I having threeness in us, a lot of threeness in us. Probably, I would say, it's safe to say, Laura, you share these these characteristics with me that have served you well in your sporting life and in your, you're the chief marketing officer for this company, Revigy. I mean, that's a big deal. You're a young lady, a rising star. Sacrifice, discipline, ambition is getting you where you are these days. Good stuff, okay? For me, wrote some books, started some companies, played golf in college, yada, 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 okay? We should be proud of that. However, here's where it gets ugly. These blind spots are going to betray us someday. And for me, they already have. And probably for all of us who share these specific traits that are virtues at times, they've betrayed you as well. The sacrifice, you take it too far. You're sacrificing too many other kinds of things that you shouldn't be sacrificing. The discipline, you're not asking maybe for help because you got this. You know what needs to happen. Nobody needs to inspire you or show you the way, but you're not getting good coaching or advice from people. Ambition. We've all seen stories and heard stories of ambition run amok. You know, Michael Phelps, one of the greatest Olympians of all time. Is that why the life he had to live to get there? Is that why he became an alcoholic and a drug addict and had to go to rehab? Think about that. So these virtues, they're blind spots because we don't know when they become vices. We just continue being who we are and what has worked for us. And so we don't see them. So if you can, in the spirit of increasing your emotional intelligence, if you can break through, have a greater level of self-awareness and see these things, that's the key. That's really where you start to make a phenomenal turn in terms of your leadership. I won't go through that story. Some action steps, and then we're going to do a poll here. David, that's a cue. Hang on a second. So action steps right now, listening on the line, list your top 3 virtues. Think about them, list them. The things that you say, because of these 3 traits, and not just exclusively those, but let's keep this simple. These 3 traits really helped me get where I am today in my career. Now, for each one of those, I want you to think about how it's possible, a specific situation where maybe one of those virtues has become or could become a vice for you. Here's the key. Do not judge yourself. It's game over in terms of the exercise and in terms of the putting in the work on yourself if you start judging yourself, because you'll say something like, you'll start defending how you behaved. And I don't want you to do that. I just want you to be objective and say, yeah, I think this is a situation where my virtue became a vice. And then, more homework later, reflect on that when you get some time today or this week and learn from it, because there's a ton of learning to be had when you go through this. Okay. Are we ready for the poll, Laura?
Let's do it. All right. So when we were creating this poll and trying to figure out how we could kind of roll up each one of some of these blind spots that leaders typically have or commonly have. So I wanted to ask which blind spot trait you might be most guilty of. So being impulsive, some of that was some of the competitive too. If you think you see the way to win, you're just going in that direction full speed, right? Or being intense. I think a lot of us maybe have been accused of being too intense throughout our lifetimes.
I can't
not guilty.
The results of this.
Being confrontational, that's a common trait with, is it 8 in the Enneagram too? Can
Yes,
be a little more.
8's, we'll tell you how it is. I talk about my father all the time. I love him. Throughout his career at Whirlpool, he used to tell me nobody ever had to wonder where he stood with people and things. And I'm saying that's something that an 8 would say, right? And again, I mean, that can be a virtue, knowing exactly what you're dealing with. And it can become a vice when that can become a bit too confrontational in some situations, right?
Mm-hmm. Commanding too. This one actually came up because our head of sales and I both took, I think 16personalities.com kind of personifies that Myers-Briggs test. And it came back that my personification was the executive and his was the commander. And we were laughing because we get along really well, especially as sales and marketing leaders. Most of the time you butt heads, but we're really well aligned and see eye to eye. And we were joking that if we didn't, there would be an all-out war internally. And then the last one.
Who would win that war, Laura?
I would definitely.
I'm not betting against you. And I know Joe, but I'm not betting against you.
I'm expecting a text from Joe because he's on this call. And the last one being self-reliant, that, common leadership, I can do it myself. Let me just strong arm my way into it. Somebody gave an example kind of echoing a little bit of what I was saying earlier about the leader that I had experienced that would say that they want to hear ideas, but in reality, it was going to be that person's ideas that got executed. So sometimes that comes from just building up that skill of being self-reliant, which can be a very positive trait to have, but can also be detrimental.
Yes. All right. So what's our survey saying?
Oh, all right. So I would have lost my bet here. Self-reliant won out with 29%. We have a pretty even split between impulsive, intense, and confrontational. And then there was a couple commanding and a couple others. So self-reliant was the big winner here.
And that is typical. This isn't an Enneagram webinar. I do give those, by the way, for anybody who's interested, but that's very typical of a 3, and the 8 to some degree as well. The 8 has great vision typically. They're self-starters. They take initiative. They boldly go where no one yet on the team has gone. The 3s they see the finish line. They go north and south. They just want to get to the end and accomplish the next thing to accomplish. Okay, so let's move on. Good stuff. Thank you all for participating in that. So let's talk about blind spots and coaching very specifically. So the senior sales leaders here, maybe DOSs, certainly vice presidents of sales, EVPs, maybe chief revenue officers, you're coaching with your people. Let's give you some things to think about to improve that. First of all, things to watch out for, blind spots killing your coaching efforts. Does some of this ring a bell? When you're expecting them, wanting them, driving them to manage the way you managed the team, when you had that team of 6 reps. Got to watch that, right? We got to give people their space. There are a lot of different ways to get to the end, i.e. to lead effectively, and maybe doing it in your style is not what's needed, especially by the person who now has that team. Trying to fix somebody on your team, that's a big no-no. And again, this goes deep. I think people can smell this. They can smell the aura when what you're saying is very different than what you're thinking. When you're thinking, I'm trying to fix you, but you're trying to be coy and disguise that. People can read this. They feel it. So nobody on earth needs to be fixed. So we have to change that mentality if that's in your brain. Telling is not coaching. One of the challenges you have, if you don't have a lot of time, you want to quickly get through to your people in the vein of coaching. I know that sometimes that can be valuable. Repeatedly, though, probably not so valuable. Got to get into more of a questioning kind of coaching mentality to balance out when those times when telling might be very good advice. And then honestly, how well do you really know your people? I have a guy in, I'll call him out, Chris Sarton. He's the president of a company called Hutton Services in Houston. And I've been working with Chris and his team for about 6 years. He really knows his people, and they love him because he loves his people. And they will go to battle as they do every day for Chris because he's that kind of a guy. All right, moving on. What good looks like in coaching. Establish a cadence. A cadence maybe weekly if you can do that. I have a number of clients that have a weekly cadence. It works very well for them. Monthly cadences at a minimum. Maybe you're talking at the weekly cadences. Maybe it's all about staying on top of the detail. It's about execution and reinforcing things like processes and culture and values. The monthly, maybe that's more about rising above the day-to-day and thinking through people and processes and pipeline and performance and issues. And maybe even a quarterly cadence, which is more about alignment to corporate objectives and strategy and direction and things like that. Got to have a cadence. Provide a framework of the conversation to be had at that cadence. Don't just come up and like, okay, what do you want to talk about today? Have a very defined cadence. It could be a 3-question type of cadence. With my clients, with the monthlies, it is okay, let's talk people issues. Let's talk process issues, performance. That's how we go through that. And we also talk about the business results too. How's the business doing? It's good to have flexibility within that cadence though, because you got to have room to move. Maybe we spend a lot more time talking about people issues this month than we do next month. Maybe it's more of a performance thing next month. So you got to have flexibility to go where the conversation needs to go, but you're still within the goalposts. And then finally, back to EQ, sensitivity to the moment. Maybe you're ready to go and having this conversation you have every month or every week, but you sense something different today in this person who reports to you. Grab that, make that a safe place to say, hey, what's going on? Everything okay? And invite that that kind of conversation, right? Be ready to pivot if you need to. 3 high-value coaching questions. I love this book. You can see the screen, but there's mine. Michael Bungay Stanier, he's a Canadian coach. He was named the Canadian Coach of the Year, I think, in 2020, maybe. I love these questions, and these are questions I use in my every month coaching with clients. So my frontline leaders, my presidents, my DOSs, hey, what's getting your attention? I listen, and I'll say, and what else? And guess what? Something else is getting your attention. Then I might go, and what else? And that eventually trails off, but there's a lot of stuff, but you get what's getting their attention, whether it should be or shouldn't. And you invite the follow-up question to find out more qualitatively and quantitatively. And then the third question, what's the real challenge here for you? He goes into it in this very short book he has, why that's a really good question. You're really getting to the point of narrowing what is really getting that person's attention, and therefore what they should be spending their time on, either fixing it, dealing with it, or maybe leveraging it and making it work to their advantage. So those are some 3 high-value questions. Build those into your coaching when you can throughout. It doesn't have to be just on your monthlies or weeklies, but just randomly ask these kinds of questions. I think they're going to give you some good information about what's in the head of that person that you're coaching. And then finally, for this section, how data affects blind spots. I have an entire section of my book, Blind Spots, 4 chapters on this topic, because interestingly enough, this is what inspired me to begin to write the book Blind Spots. And then I had a real serious pivot, which I'm grateful for. But the data stuff, there's more data these days than we've ever had before. And in many cases, that's a great thing, because data can be extremely valuable. We all know that. But with more data, there's more transparency, right? We can see more of the work, if you like a lean analogy. If you can't see the work they say in lean, then you can't do anything about it. So with more data, there's more transparency of the work, right? Pipeline data, call data, all the connecting of dots data that Revigy provides, CRM data, right? But more transparency means there's more exposure. There's fewer places to hide. And we don't want anybody to hide, but again, we're talking about that white space, recognizing that somebody might be wanting to hide and there's no place for them to hide. How are you going to handle that in your conversation, in that pipeline review? Are you going to use it against them and then they're going to get defensive maybe, or are you going to take a different approach? More exposure can lead to more tension, less trust. People can get more defensive, less trust, less emotional connection. Boom. You've got a killer here, right? So that you can see how all of these are connected just because there's more data. So more data, good thing. Just be really aware of what that has brought now to conversations, and how it can possibly affect those conversations. More data, more transparency does not tell the whole story. We got to get at the whole story by asking questions and learning. All right, some action steps. Think about the last 30 days. Identify the coaching occasions you had. How many? I mean, start there. How many of these did you have? How long were these? Were they little 5-minute get in and out? Were they, weekly cadences of an hour, a half an hour kind of thing? Just, what's the awareness of that? And then finally, can you recall the questions you asked during these coaching conversations? That's all. I think there could be some good reflection for you there with with that little exercise. All right, Laura, we good still? Heading into
We
the
are
home
good.
straight.
We
Okay.
are. It just thundered here. I was wondering if you just heard that.
Oh, no, I did not.
No,
Well,
these are great. This has made me think of something else too, that I had a prior employer that used to say a lot too, was focusing on the employee experience. And if your employees are happier, then they treat your customers better. So this has a bigger effect than, just employee morale or retention rates for employees. This trickles down to your customers. They mirror your behavior.
Great, absolutely. Well, shout out to one of my favorites, Chick-fil-A, baby. I mean, when's the last time you went to Chick-fil-A and somebody wasn't smiling? They were scowling. They acted like, what, why are you here? Ruining my day. No, they're grateful that you stopped by. They smile at you. They take care of you. They apologize if it takes too long, so, and that comes from leadership. Those people don't work for people that they can't stand to work for, right? To your point. All right. Home stretch here. So now we're talking about you working with other people on your senior leadership team, your division leadership team, a full-time job in and of itself, right? A full-time job full of all kinds of political dynamics and things. So let's talk about what you can do regarding blind spots. So I think that one of the things that is a good thing to do, blind spots related or not, is to, when you're having maybe a conflict or you've got some question about something, try to refocus with that individual, that other functional leader, on the shared vision. You mentioned, Laura, you and Joe, it's easy for sales and marketing to go at it from time to time. And maybe you guys just naturally are just so passionate about this Revigy business that you're defaulting to that in these conversations, that's what it's about, so you're not going to drop to a lower level in this conversation. You're going to stay high, knowing that together you guys are committed to the shared vision, the values, and the goals. So I think that's an important thing to remember. Beware of the energy you give something. My clients, they like this. It always gets them by surprise, because typically they're giving something too much energy. And I'll just ask them, how much energy do you want to give this? This woman's bothering you. This other functional leader over, he's really stressing you out. Okay, I'll listen. Why is that? How much energy do you want to give this? And sometimes, not always, but sometimes I go, you know what? I'm giving it too much energy. So just think about that. That's not about that individual who's causing the heartburn. It's about the person who's choosing to say, this person's causing me heartburn. So we have that. We don't have to give that power away, right? We have that power to deal with that the way we want to. Practice taking the high road. Work it out directly. I see this a lot where somebody will be complaining to me about somebody else, and I'll say, have you talked to him about it? No. You plan to do that? Big boys and girls, that's what they do these days. So maybe that's what you should do. And then empathy. Daniel Goleman, 4 domains of EQ: self-awareness, self-management, or self-regulation. Empathy, number 3. And then relationship management. We just don't give empathy enough. My wife has a beautiful saying. I try to use it all the time and share it. Give grace. You see a situation, it's causing you heartburn. Give grace. That person that's causing you heartburn, something's going on, and it ain't fun. And I'm sure they didn't wake up today saying, I want to go see how many people I can annoy today. Ultimately, it is about your awareness meter, man. Have it as high as possible. Do the things that you need to do to have that high level of awareness. You have to put intention to it. I don't know if anybody, no client that I have says this comes natural to me, because what we're talking about awareness of, we're talking about is not the virtue. It's like breathing. Awareness of the vice before the virtue becomes a vice. And that's hard, because you're running hard from meeting to meeting. You're trying to be your best. You're trying to make an impact, be an effective senior sales leader. You've got to have a string around your finger or whatever works for you, shock collar, to have that awareness that your virtues can become vices. So that said, a couple of things that you might do to increase your awareness. Take an EQ assessment. There are several good ones. I'm sorry we didn't provide a link to one that I have used in the past. Looking for if I don't have that. But
I actually dropped it in the chat when we were talking about the Enneagram. So, and yeah.
And then, of course, the Enneagram, my favorite. But, out of fairness to the others, if you've never taken any of these others, take more than one. Take Myers-Briggs, take the Enneagram. I think the Enneagram provides things that these other tests do not. It's a very, very powerful assessment, but it's just an assessment. It's just a start. I'm not going to apologize. Read my book. Some of you, it'll connect with and some won't. That's how books are, right? But if it connects with you, you might say, wow, that really got me thinking of the kind of person that I am. And that's increased awareness. And that's a good thing. And then the other one I love is Leadership and Self-Deception. That book rocked me when I read it about 10 or 15 years ago. And then finally, practice, commit to a project. Hint, you are the project, right? There's nobody on your team. There's no other functional leader that needs to be fixed. However dysfunctional he or she can sometimes be. Okay, you are the one that needs to be the project. You need to work on you. You need to do what Richard Rohr says, the shadow boxing, right? To really challenge yourself. No judgment allowed. The best part of you will emerge if you do that, and it'll take time, and it will be painful. And what somebody said the other day, their spiritual teacher is suffering. That is my spiritual teacher, suffering. There is so much to learn from suffering. There's so much better versions of us that we can be if we allow ourselves to learn from those lessons. So, okay. That's all I've got. Thanks, everybody. Laura, thank you so much for being such a gracious host, as always. Hopefully, everybody got a lot out of this.
Yeah, thank you all for your participation. Mark, so nice to have you back again. Thank you very much. As we said in the last email reminder we sent out, 10 of you will be receiving a copy of Mark's book, Blind Spots. So look for an email from me. I'll reach out to you directly. And then also watch your emails. Give us a second to package all this up, but we will also send you a recording of this session as well. So really appreciate all the time today, everyone. And we will see you again, hopefully next month.
Bye-bye.